Good evening, dear friends, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Wherever you're listening from tonight, maybe tucked safely under the blankets, curled up in your favorite quiet corner of the house, or perhaps lying somewhere peaceful while the world slowly quiets down outside. I'm so happy you're here with me. Take a slow, gentle breath in. Let your shoulders soften and drop. Maybe pull the blanket or duvet up just a little higher and allow the day to quietly drift away. London fog lay thick upon the city that chill autumn evening in 1889. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge, fingers steepled beneath his chin, the coal fire crackling softly. Then came the urgent knock. Sharp, insistent, Mrs. Hudson showed in a trembling verdure. Canon Theodore Langley had been found dead at Westminster Abbey. In the Lady Chapel, a medieval silver stiletto driven deep into his heart. Scotland Yard saw suicide, a man of God tormented by secret guilt. But Holmes saw a link. The hilt had been wiped clean of prints, yet the canon's own gloves lay untouched beside him. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The first link. I set these events down in my journal exactly as they unfolded, dear reader, during that fog-bound autumn of 1889, when London seemed wrapped in a grey shroud, and the very air tasted of coal smoke and river mud. It was 7:30 on a Tuesday evening. The coal fire in our sitting room at 221B Baker Street snapped and hissed, throwing warm orange light across the worn Persian rug and the chemical retorts scattered on the deal table. The sharp scent of Holmes's strong shag tobacco hung heavy, a blending with the faint carbolic smell that always clung to my medical bag. I sat near the window in my usual armchair, the rough tweed of the cushion cool against my back, turning the damp pages of the Evening Standard. Outside, the fog pressed thick against the panes, muffling the clatter of hansom wheels on the wet cobbles below, and the distant mournful hoot of a Thames steamer. Holmes reclined opposite me, long legs stretched toward the blaze, eyes half closed in that peculiar attitude of boredom which so often preceded his most brilliant exertions. His Stradivarius rested on the settee beside him. He had not touched it all day. The Persian slipper on the mantel, bulging with tobacco, had already been raided twice. Suddenly, the street bell rang once, sharp and impatient. We heard Mrs. Hudson's quick footsteps on the 17 stairs. Then her voice rising in mild protest. "A gentleman, Mr. Holmes. Most urgent, most distressed." The door flew open without ceremony. A man of perhaps 58 years stood on the threshold, black clerical coat dripping fog damp, boots smeared with thick Thames mud that left dark smears on our rug. His face was ashen, cheeks hollow, eyes wide with something between terror and grief. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson?" His voice trembled. "I'm Silas Grimshaw, Chief Verger of Westminster Abbey. Canon Theodore Langley has been found dead, murdered, in the Lady Chapel." Holmes rose in one fluid motion, that strange keen light kindling behind his grey eyes. "Murdered, Mr. Grimshaw. Yet I read in the late editions that Scotland Yard suspects self-destruction. They are wrong, sir, terribly wrong." Grimshaw wrung his thin hands. The canon was a man of unblemished character. Troubled of late, yes, whispers of shadows in the cloisters, but never despairing enough to take his own life. Please come at once. See with your own eyes before they remove the body. Holmes reached for his ulster and deerstalker without another word. "The game begins early tonight, Watson. Fetch your coat." The hansom we hailed rattled through streets turned ghostly by fog. Gas lamps burned dull yellow halos. The horses' hooves struck sparks from the wet stones. Big Ben tolled 8, each deep bronze note swallowed almost at once by the mist. We alighted at the great west door of the abbey. The cold struck like iron through our boots. Inside, the vast nave smelled of ancient stone, old incense, and the faint metallic bite of fresh blood. Inspector Lestrade waited near the rood screen, a collar turned up against the chill, breath steaming in short clouds. "Holmes," he greeted with weary sarcasm, "come to prove us fools again. It's plain as day, suicide." The canon kneeling at prayer, medieval silver stiletto through his own heart, gloves laid neatly aside. No sign of struggle, door locked from inside. Holmes made no reply. He moved forward like a shadow among the tombs, dark lantern in hand. The Lady Chapel was smaller, more intimate, its air colder still. Canon Langley lay prone before the high altar, black cassock fanned out, arms outstretched as though in final supplication. The silver dagger, its hilt chased with saints and vines, stood upright in his back, just below the left shoulder blade. A small pool of blood had spread and thickened on the flagstones. His kid gloves rested beside his right hand, palms upward, eye untouched. Holmes knelt, coat brushing the cold stone. I crouched beside him, the chill seeping through my trousers. "The first link, Watson," he murmured, voice low and reverent. "Observe the hilt." I bent closer. The ornate silver gleamed dully in the lantern light, wiped absolutely clean of blood and prints, yet a faint grey streak of lamp black still clung to one filigree edge, fresh and undisturbed. Yet the canon's gloves show no blood, no grip creases, no smear. Holmes continued. "Someone else gripped that blade and took care to remove all trace." Lestrade snorted from the doorway. "He could have wiped it himself before he died." "With 6 inches of steel through the heart and lung?" Holmes rose smoothly. "The second link, the angle of entry. The thrust is upward, from behind and slightly to the left. No living man could drive a dagger so deep into his own back, at that trajectory, without an impossible contortion, and certainly not while kneeling calmly." He turned to the verger, who hovered near the chapel arch, face grey. "When did you last see Canon Langley alive, Mr. Grimshaw?" "Yesterday at Evensong, sir. He locked the treasury himself at 6 o'clock. Said only that he wished to pray alone later." "And the weapon?" Holmes asked. "Its provenance?" "The silver stiletto of St. Edward Confessor, kept in a glass case in the Triforium Gallery. The lock was forced. We found the treasury key still in the canon's cassock pocket." Holmes produced his lens and knelt once more. With delicate tweezers, he lifted a tiny thread caught on the wound's ragged edge. "The third link." He held it to the light, a single strand of blue worsted wool. The canon wore only black. This fibre does not belong to him." He sealed it carefully in an envelope. Then his gaze dropped to the floor. In the thin dust beside the altar lay a partial boot print, narrow, elegant, with 3 small hobnails, in the right heel, forming a crooked triangle. "Petit France bootmaker," Holmes said instantly. "The nails are distinctive, and the print is fresh, laid down after the abbey closed to visitors." Lestrade folded his arms. "So the killer entered after hours, struck, and left no other trace?" "Precisely," Holmes answered. "The chain has begun, Inspector. 3 links already. Wiped hilt, impossible angle, alien thread. More will follow." We returned to Baker Street near midnight. The fire had sunk to red embers. The room smelled of cooling tobacco and damp wool. Holmes paced before the hearth, a violin bow in hand, drawing slow, mournful notes that mingled with the foghorns drifting up from the river. At length he stopped, steepled his fingers beneath his chin. Recall the retired Cullinan case, Watson? A man found hanged in his locked studio. Scotland Yard cried suicide. Yet the rope burns on the neck slanted the wrong way. A single fibre caught on a skylight pulley told the tale. The killer had staged it all, forgetting that wood and rope remember every strain. One overlooked detail forged the chain and hanged a murderer. So here, stone remembers footsteps, fabric remembers touch, blood remembers angle. He drew deeply on his pipe, the strong Virginia scent curling upward. Tonight we hold 3 links. Tomorrow we forge more. The first link is forged, Watson. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. The following morning broke grey and raw over London. A thin, persistent rain tapped against the window panes of 221B Baker Street, carrying with it the heavy smell of wet coal smoke from 100 chimneys. Inside, the fire burned steadily, its warmth battling the chill that crept up from the floorboards. I woke to the sound of Holmes already moving about. Boots on the rug, the soft scrape of a match against the mantel, the rich, bitter aroma of strong coffee rising from the gasogene. He stood by the table, ulster on, deerstalker in hand, eyes bright with purpose. 4 locations this morning, Watson, he announced without preamble. We must move swiftly before the rain washes away what little the fog has spared. We dress warmly. The streets are treacherous. I swallowed the last of my coffee, hot, bitter, scalding my tongue, and followed him down the 17 steps. Mrs. Hudson called after us with a warning about the damp, but Holmes was already hailing a hansom. The cab rattled away through slick streets, wheels hissing on wet cobblestones, the horses' hooves clopping in steady rhythm. Our first destination was Dean's Yard, the quiet precinct behind the Abbey, where the canon had kept his private residence. A narrow Georgian house of faded yellow brick, its brass knocker polished to a dull gleam despite the weather. Lady Eleanor Langley received us in the first-floor drawing-room. Tall and pale, she wore unrelieved black silk that rustled softly as she rose to greet us, and the room smelled faintly of lilies from a vase on the mantel, and the sharp, clean bite of carbolic soap. Someone had scrubbed the floors recently, perhaps to erase traces of grief. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, voice low and controlled. "I expected you. My husband was troubled these last weeks. He spoke often of shadows moving in the cloisters after dark, of footsteps where no one should walk, but suicide? That I cannot believe. He was a man of deep faith." Holmes seated himself near the fire, steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "Lady Eleanor, when did you last see your husband?" "Monday afternoon. He left for evensong at 4. I dined alone and retired early. He did not return." "And visitors to this house in the preceding days?" "Only the usual. Reverend Martin Thorpe called yesterday at 3. He seemed agitated. He spoke briefly with Theodore in the study, then left abruptly." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Agitated? In what manner?" "Pale, hands trembling. He asked my husband to meet him later. Something urgent about the fabric fund. Theodore promised he would." We thanked her and departed. The second link, I thought. The name Thorpe appearing again so soon. Our next call was the Abbey Treasury itself. Grimshaw, the verger, met us at the Triforium stair with a heavy keyring. The air up here was colder, smelling strongly of old vellum, dust, and the faint metallic tang of silver polish. Behind thick glass cases rested reliquaries and chalices. One case stood empty, its lock showing fresh gouges. Holmes bent to the damage, lens in hand. "Glove leather," he murmured. "Fine kid, scraped along the brass edge. Are the same quality as the canon's unused pair in the chapel." He straightened. The killer wore gloves, perhaps the canon's own, to handle the dagger, then left them beside the body to suggest suicide. But he overlooked this tiny abrasion. Grimshaw shivered. Who would dare profane such a relic? Someone desperate, Mr. Grimshaw. Desperation leaves marks. Third location. The bootmaker's narrow shop on Petty France, a stone's throw from the Abbey. The interior smelled of leather oil, wax, and the warm animal scent of freshly cut soles. The proprietor, a wiry man in apron and sleeve protectors, peered at the photograph Holmes had taken of the boot print. "Aye, that's Reverend Thorpe's right boot, sir. Brought it in 10 days ago. Heel was coming loose, 3 hobnails pulled crooked. I set 'em straight myself. A distinctive pattern." Holmes nodded once. "The 4th link, thank you." Outside, the rain had eased to mist. We walked the short distance to Little Sanctuary, where Thorpe kept lodgings in a tall, narrow house of sooty brick. The hallway smelled of damp wool and boiled cabbage. Thorpe himself answered the door, thin, mid-30s, clerical collar askew, eyes red-rimmed as though from sleeplessness or weeping. "Mr. Holmes?" His voice was high, unsteady. I was expecting the police, not you." Holmes stepped inside without invitation. The sitting room was small, sparsely furnished. A blue worsted overcoat hung on the back of a chair. One sleeve showed a fresh tear near the cuff. "You were at the canon's house yesterday afternoon," Holmes said quietly. "Yes, a matter of parish accounts. Nothing more. And after evensong, I returned here, read Augustine's confessions until midnight." Holmes crossed to the coat, lifted the torn sleeve. With tweezers, he drew forth a single blue thread, identical in shade and twist to the one found on the dagger. "This matches the fibre on the wound," he said. "Curious, is it not?" Thorpe paled. I tore it on a nail in the cloister 2 days ago. Pure coincidence." Holmes replaced the thread carefully. "Coincidences are the refuge of the guilty, Mr. Thorpe. We shall see." We left him standing in the doorway, rain dripping from the eaves onto his uncovered head. Back at Baker Street, the gas lamps had been lit early. Their soft hiss mingled with the crackle of the renewed fire. Holmes stood before the hearth, pipe in hand, the strong tobacco smoke curling upward in slow spirals. "Links multiply rapidly, Watson," he said. "Lady Eleanor's mention of an urgent meeting, the scratched case, the boot print, the matching thread. Yet something jars. The evidence points too neatly to Thorpe, as though someone wished us to see it." He paced twice, then stopped. "A red herring, perhaps? Or the chain is genuine, but incomplete. We forge connections today, but tomorrow we must test their strength." He turned to me, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "The links are forging, Watson. The chain takes shape." Chapter 3. The chain grows. The 3rd day dawned colder still, with a biting wind sweeping down from the north and driving the last remnants of fog into the narrow streets around Westminster. I rose early to find Holmes, already at the breakfast table, coat on, scarf wound tight, just studying a small-scale map of the Abbey precincts spread beside his untouched toast. The room smelled of fresh coffee, bitter and hot, and the lingering smoke from last night's pipe. Outside, the clop of handsome hooves on the cobbles sounded muffled, as though the city itself held its breath. "We return to the scene this evening, Watson," Holmes said without looking up. "The chapel by daylight told us much. By twilight, It may tell more. Bring your revolver and a dark lantern. We hunt for what was overlooked in haste. We reached the abbey as the last rays of a watery sun slanted through the great rose window, turning the nave dust motes into golden sparks. Grimshaw met us at the west door, lantern already lit, face drawn with fatigue. "The police have gone, sir," he whispered. "They say the case is closed. Suicide. But I cannot rest." Holmes nodded curtly. "Show us the Lady Chapel again. Leave us there." The small chapel felt even colder now, the stone flags radiating chill through our boots. The body had been removed, but a faint dark stain remained on the floor where the canon had fallen. Holmes dropped to one knee, dark lantern casting a narrow beam across the flags. He moved methodically, inch by inch. "Here," he said suddenly, pointing to two parallel scratches, shallow, fresh, perhaps 4 inches apart, leading from the altar toward the north wall. Something heavy was dragged. Not the body. The cassock shows no drag marks, but something smaller. A box. A book. He followed the scratches to the base of the altar cloth. Lifting the embroidered hem, he revealed a small silver button, half embedded in a crack between stones. He extracted it carefully with tweezers. "From a cassock cuff," he murmured, "and see, engraved inside, MT. Martin Thorpe," I breathed. Holmes pocketed the button. "The 5th link, but we are not finished." He turned his attention to the north cloister door, which led to the triforium passages and the treasury above. The door was unlocked, unusual after hours. Inside the passage, the air grew damper, smelling of old stone, mildew, and something sharper. Gunpowder? No, lamp oil recently spilled. Holmes paused at a loose flagstone near the wall. With the blade of his penknife, he pried it up. Beneath lay a small iron strongbox, its lock forced, lid ajar. Inside, nothing but a torn scrap of vellum bearing columns of figures in faded ink. "Ledger entries," Holmes said, holding the fragment to the lantern. "Dates, amounts, initials, TL. It a fabric fund. Then later subtractions. Embezzlement, Watson." The canon kept a private record, hidden here rather than in the main accounts. He must have confronted the thief. We replaced the stone and returned to the chapel. Holmes stood silent for a long moment, eyes half closed, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Then he spoke, voice low and deliberate. "Major deductive leap, Watson. Consider the chain thus far. Wiped hilt, impossible self-inflicted angle, blue worsted thread from a coat not the canon's, Thorpe's distinctive bootprint, scratched treasury case, torn sleeve yielding identical thread, silver button bearing his initials, hidden ledger showing systematic theft from Abbey funds. The pattern is clear. Canon Langley discovered Thorpe's embezzlement, perhaps only days ago. He arranged a private meeting in the chapel after closing, intending confrontation. Thorpe came armed with the stolen key, removed the relic dagger for dramatic effect, or to make the death appear the work of a madman, and struck from behind. He dragged the strongbox here to retrieve and destroy the evidence, but in haste overlooked the loose stone and the fallen button. The wiped hilt and placed gloves were meant to suggest suicide, a desperate, clumsy attempt at misdirection. He turned to me, that peculiar light burning bright in his eyes. "Recall the Musgrave ritual, Watson? Brunton the butler murdered Rachel Howells over a centuries-old parchment that promised treasure. Scotland Yard saw only a missing servant and a drowned woman. But one brass key dropped in the mere one faded diagram of oak and elm shadows at noon, a one single angle of sunlight striking a spot in the grounds, and the chain formed, link by link the truth emerged. Greed, betrayal, Murder concealed beneath family tradition. The ground remembered the steps. The parchment remembered the code. So here the stone remembers the drag. The fabric remembers the tear. The silver remembers the owner. The past echoes in the present. Holmes drew upon his pipe, the strong tobacco scent momentarily overpowering the chapel's ancient mustiness. The chain grows stronger with every link forged. Logic binds the guilty, Watson. Thorpe is our man, unless some sixth link breaks the pattern. But I think not. We left the Abbey as Big Ben struck 9, its deep notes rolling through the night like a warning. The wind had dropped. A fresh layer of fog was rising from the river, he carrying the dank smell of Thames mud and distant coal fires. Back in Baker Street, the fire roared high. Holmes stood before it, the ledger scrap spread on the mantel beside his violin. The chain grows stronger, he said softly. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the Links. The fourth morning arrived with a deceptive brightness. Thin sunlight pierced the fog for the first time in days, though the air remained raw and carried the sharp tang of river mud and coal smoke drifting from the chimneys of Westminster. At 221B, the fire burned low, its warmth barely reaching the corners where chemical apparatus gleamed dully. Holmes had risen before dawn. I found him standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the street below where hansoms splashed through shallow puddles. Today we test the chain. Watson, he said without turning. Every link must be struck upon the anvil. Weak ones will shatter. The true ones will ring true. 5 scenes, 5 trials. We begin at once. Our first test took us back to Dean's Yard. Lady Eleanor Langley received us again in the same drawing room, though now the lilies in the vase had begun to droop, their heavy scent mingling uneasily with the carbolic that still lingered. She stood near the window, black silk rustling, face composed but eyes shadowed. "You suspect someone close to us, Mr. Holmes?" she asked quietly. "I suspect no one until the links prove otherwise," Holmes replied. "Tell me again of your movements on the evening of the murder." "I attended a soirée at Lady Ashford's in Grosvenor Square. Left at 6:30, returned near 11. My coachman and 2 footmen can confirm it. I never left the house after returning." Holmes nodded. "We shall verify, but for now, the link holds." Second trial. The antiquarian shop of Josiah Kane in Cecil Court. A narrow alley off the Strand lined with booksellers and curiosity dealers. The shop smelled of old leather bindings, dust, and the faint metallic bite of polishing oil. Kane himself, short, round pince-nez perched on a red nose, greeted us with oily politeness. The silver stiletto of St. Edward? Yes, I coveted it for my private collection. Offered the Dean 300 guineas last spring. Refused, of course, but on the night in question, I was in Paris. Cross-channel packet records will show it. I sailed the previous day. Holmes examined the man's ledgers briefly, then the almanac on the counter. "The link breaks cleanly here, Mr. Kane. You are eliminated." Third location. The modest boarding house in Pimlico, where Miss Amelia Voss, the Canon's former secretary, now resided. The hallway reeked of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. Her small sitting room smelled of lavender water and ink. Miss Voss, 28, plain, eyes red from recent tears, twisted a handkerchief in her lap. "I loved him once," she confessed in a low voice. "We were engaged briefly 2 years ago. He broke it off, said his duty to the church came first. I was bitter, yes, but I left London that very afternoon for Brighton. My landlady there has my letter dated the morning after the murder. I could not have done it." Holmes studied her face a long moment. "Your grief is genuine," The link of motive exists, but opportunity does not. You are cleared. Fourth trial. The beadle Tom Wilkins, whom we found sweeping the north porch of the Abbey. He was a stout man in his 50s, breath heavy with the sour reek of last night's ale, from the Westminster Arms. His brougham paused when he saw us. "Seen a shadowy figure, you said?" Holmes asked sharply. Wilkins shifted. "Aye, sir. Tall cloak, moving quick-like near the Lady Chapel door." "At what hour?" 10 past 10, near enough." Holmes produced his watch. Yet the Abbey verger's log shows the doors bolted at 9:45. No one entered or left after. And the Westminster Arms publican remembers you at the bar until 11:30, boasting of ghosts in the cloisters to anyone who'd listen. Wilkins flushed crimson. "I might have exaggerated, sir, for the price of a pint." "The link of the mysterious shadow shatters," Holmes said coldly. "Be fabricated for attention, or coin." Fifth and final test. We returned to Little Sanctuary and Thorpe's lodgings once more. This time Holmes carried a telegram form he had drafted the previous evening. We found Thorpe alone, seated at a small table, face haggard, a half-empty bottle of cheap brandy before him. The room smelled of spirits, stale tobacco, and despair. Holmes placed the form on the table without preamble. A message in the canon's hand. "Meet me in the Lady Chapel at 10. Urgent matter of the accounts. TL's found among your papers when we searched yesterday. You destroyed the original, or thought you had." Thorpe stared at the paper, then at Holmes. His hands trembled. I burned it, but you reconstructed it from the impression left on the blotter beneath. Carbon paper is treacherous, Mr. Thorpe." The words pressed through. Thorpe's shoulders slumped. For a moment I thought he would confess then and there, but he only shook his head. "I didn't kill him. I swear it." Holmes regarded him steadily. "We shall see. But every other link you forged points here. The blue thread, the boot, the button, the ledger, the summons. One by one the false chains break. The true one remains." We left him in silence, the door closing softly behind us. Back at Baker Street, the gas lamps hissed softly. The fire had been built up high, its warmth welcome after the chill streets. Holmes stood before it, pipe in hand, smoke curling upward in slow, thoughtful spirals. 5 trials, Watson. 4 links shattered utterly. Lady Eleanor's alibi unbreakable. Kane in Paris, Miss Voss in Brighton. Wilkins exposed as a drunken storyteller. Only Thorpe's chain withstands the hammer. Weak links lie broken on the floor. The true chain emerges, strong, unyielding, and drawing ever tighter around our quarry. He turned, eyes gleaming in the firelight. The true chain emerges. Chapter 5. The Chain Tightens. The evening of the 5th day fell heavy and dark over London. A fresh fog had rolled up from the Thames thicker than before, carrying the dank, fishy smell of river mud, mingled with the acrid bite of coal smoke from the barges. At 221B Baker Street, the fire roared high, its crackle the only cheerful sound in the room. Holmes stood by the mantel, pipe clenched between his teeth, studying the small collection of evidence laid out before him. The blue thread in its envelope, the silver button, the torn ledger scrap, the reconstructed telegram impression. His eyes held that peculiar predatory gleam I had come to recognize as the prelude to action. "Lestrade has been wired," he said abruptly. 2 plainclothes men will watch the Abbey's north cloister from 9 o'clock. Thorpe will come tonight. He must. The strongbox still lies beneath the loose flag. He cannot risk leaving the ledger fragment where it might be found. We shall be waiting inside. I checked my revolver, the cold steel smooth under my fingers, then slipped it into my ulster pocket. The taste of strong black coffee lingered bitterly on my tongue from the cup I had drained an hour earlier. We left Baker Street in a hansom just as Big Ben struck 9:30. The cab rattled through fog-choked streets. Gas lamps burned like isolated moons, their light barely penetrating the murk, and the horses' hooves struck dull echoes from the wet cobblestones. We alighted at the Poet's Corner door, where a silent constable admitted us. Inside, the vast abbey swallowed every sound. Our footsteps rang softly on the stone, then faded into nothingness. Holmes led the way to the north cloister. Dark lantern shuttered to the thinnest slit. We took position in the deep shadow of an arched recess opposite the loose flagstone. The cold seeped through our boots. The air smelled of ancient damp stone, old incense, and the faint metallic trace of lamp oil from Grimshaw's last round. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then footsteps, slow, cautious, approaching from the triforium stair. A narrow beam of light flickered. A figure emerged, clerical coat, hat pulled low. Martin Thorpe, and he carried a small lantern and a canvas satchel slung over one shoulder. He paused at the flagstone, glanced around once, then knelt. With trembling hands he pried the stone free. The scrape of iron on stone sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. Holmes stepped from the shadows, lantern unshuttered, throwing a harsh white beam across Thorpe's face. "The game is afoot, Mr. Thorpe," he said quietly, "and it ends here." Thorpe started violently, lantern clattering to the flags. He scrambled to his feet, eyes wide with panic. "Holmes, how—" "You left too many links," Holmes answered. "The thread from your coat on the dagger, the boot print, the button from your cuff, the ledger you failed to destroy, the summons you burned but could not erase from the blotter. Every step you took tonight was foreseen." Thorpe backed away, glancing toward the cloister door. "You have nothing. Circumstantial. Nothing more." Holmes advanced a single step, then explained this. From his pocket, he drew a small linen handkerchief, stained dark at one corner with dried blood. He unfolded it carefully. Embroidered in the corner, MT found in the lining of your satchel when Lestrade's men searched your rooms this afternoon. Canon Langley's blood. You wiped the hilt, but overlook the handkerchief you used to staunch a small cut on your own hand during the struggle. Thorpe's face crumpled. For a moment, he seemed about to bolt. Then his knees buckled. He sank against the wall. I had no choice," he whispered. "The Fabric Fund. I took only what I needed at first. Debts, gambling. Then it grew. Langley found the discrepancies. He summoned me here to confess before the Dean. I came to plead. He would not listen. Said disgrace was inevitable. In rage, I seized the dagger from the case upstairs. It was over so quickly. I tried to make it look like despair, suicide. The gloves, the wiped hilt." His voice broke. Tears cut tracks through the dust on his cheeks. Holmes regarded him without pity. "You forgot that stone remembers drag marks. Fabric remembers tears. Blood remembers touch." Link by link the chain tightened. From the shadows Lestrade emerged with his two men. Handcuffs clicked shut. Thorpe offered no resistance as they led him away, footsteps echoing down the cloister until silence returned. Holmes closed his lantern. We stood a moment in darkness, the only sound our breathing and the distant muffled toll of Big Ben marking the hour. "Recall the Gloria Scott case, Watson," he said softly. "A mutiny at sea, years buried, uncovered by one small document, a confession hidden in a box. The old man's son sought to destroy it. Instead, he sealed his own fate. One overlooked scrap of paper, one moment of panic, and the chain closed. So here, Thorpe thought distance and time would protect him. But evidence does not decay. It waits. He turned toward the nave, where faint gaslight glowed through the fogged windows. The chain tightens, Watson. No escape now. We walked slowly back through the abbey, the cold stone flags firm beneath our feet, the weight of justice settling like the fog outside. Inescapable, complete. Chapter 6. Links to the Past. The sixth day dawned quiet and still, the fog of the previous night having lifted to reveal a pale, wintry sun over Westminster. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire burned steadily, its warmth carrying the comforting smell of toasted bread and fresh coffee. I found Holmes seated at the table, the morning papers spread before him, but his attention fixed instead on a small bundle of documents delivered at first light by a uniformed constable from Scotland Yard. "Thorpe has made a full statement overnight, Watson," Holmes said, tapping the top sheet. "Not a confession born of remorse, but of resignation. The chain has bound him so tightly he can no longer struggle. We must now trace its origins, how the links were first forged in the past." We travelled once more to Little Sanctuary, this time in daylight. The narrow house stood as before, soot-streaked and unremarkable, but now a constable guarded the door. Inside, the sitting room felt smaller, the air stale with the lingering odour of brandy, tobacco and defeat. Thorpe sat in the same chair as before, wrists manacled, head bowed. His clerical collar had been removed. In its place, a plain shirt open at the neck revealed the pallor of a man who had not slept. Inspector Lestrade stood by the window, notebook in hand. "He's been cooperative enough," Lestrade said gruffly. "Says he wants it all out. No point in dragging the church through more scandal." Holmes drew up a chair opposite Thorpe and regarded him steadily. "Begin at the beginning, Mr. Thorpe. Not last Monday, the years before." Thorpe drew a long, shuddering breath. "I was orphaned at 14. My father, a curate in Stepney, died of consumption. My mother followed within the year. Canon Langley, then only a minor canon, found me begging near the Abbey gates. He took me in, paid for my schooling at Westminster. I sponsored me through theological college. I owed him everything. He treated me like a son." His voice cracked on the last word. "Yet you betrayed him," Holmes said quietly. Thorpe nodded, eyes fixed on the floorboards. Debt began small. A wager at cards in my final year at college, then more. I paid with borrowed money. When I took my first curacy under the canon, the temptation grew. The fabric fund, donations for repairs, stained glass, stonework, passed through few hands. I skimmed at first, £10 here, 20 there. Thought I could repay before anyone noticed. But losses mounted. 2 years ago, the Dean asked for an audit. Langley volunteered to assist. He found the discrepancies, confronted me privately, gave me 6 months to make restitution. I could not. Holmes leaned forward slightly. "And so you planned his death?" "No." Thorpe's head jerked up. "Not planned. I went to plead that night. He was immovable. Said he would report me to the Dean the next morning. In rage, in blind panic, I ran upstairs to the Treasury. The dagger was there, gleaming in the case. I took it, came down. He was kneeling again, praying. I struck once. He fell forward without a sound. I wiped the hilt with my handkerchief, placed his gloves beside him to suggest despair, dragged the strong box to hide the ledger fragment, thought if it looked like suicide, the thefts might never come to light. He buried his face in his shackled hands. Holmes allowed a moment's silence, then spoke. Motive established means the stolen key and dagger. Opportunity, your summons and his trust in you. The past explains the present, Mr. Thorpe. A gratitude twisted into resentment. Debt into desperation. Desperation into murder. We left the house soon after. Outside, the wind carried the distant clang of Big Ben and the faint, salty smell of the river. Holmes walked in silence for some minutes, hands clasped behind his back. All links connect now, Watson, he said at length. The blue thread from his coat caught on the wound when he leaned over the body. The boot print from the heel he had repaired only days before. Nervous habit, perhaps, to keep his appearance respectable. The silver button torn loose in the struggle to move the strongbox. The telegram impression he failed to burn completely. The blood on his handkerchief from a small cut he sustained forcing the treasury lock. And the deepest link, the history of obligation turned poisonous. Every piece fits. Our past and present form one unbroken chain. Back at Baker Street, the afternoon light slanted low through the windows, gilding the dust motes that danced above the chemical table. Holmes stood before the fire, pipe in hand, the strong Virginia tobacco scent filling the room once more. Recall how often the seeds of great crimes lie buried in kindness, Watson. In the case of the Copper Beeches, a governess position masked abduction and greed. The chain began with a single photograph left carelessly in a drawer. In the Boscombe Valley mystery, old hatreds from Australia resurfaced over a stolen fortune. One blood-stained note in a pocket revealed all. Here, too, the past reached forward. Langley's generosity created Thorpe's dependence. Dependence bred resentment. Resentment forged murder. Yet evidence, small, stubborn, was silent, waited patiently to bind the guilty. He drew deeply on his pipe, eyes half closed in reflection. The chain is whole, past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The Complete Chain. The seventh day brought a crisp, pale light to London. The fog had retreated entirely, leaving the air sharp with the smell of coal smoke and wet stone. At Scotland Yard's request, we gathered once more in the Lady Chapel of Westminster Abbey shortly before noon. The great doors had been closed to visitors. Only a handful of persons stood within the cold stone circle. Lady Eleanor Langley, in her black veil. Reverend Grimshaw twisting his verger's keys nervously. The Beadle Wilkins looking sheepish and sober for once. Miss Amelia Voss, pale but composed, and flanked by two constables, Martin Thorpe in manacles, head bowed, a clerical coat replaced by a plain grey prison jacket. Inspector Lestrade stood near the altar, arms folded, waiting. Holmes moved to the centre of the chapel, where the dark stain on the flags had been scrubbed but not erased. He carried no notes, only the small evidence envelopes in his ulster pocket, and that calm, unhurried certainty that always marked the moment of revelation. Gentlemen, Lady Eleanor, we are here to close this matter, Holmes began, voice clear and deliberate in the vaulted silence, not with conjecture, but with the complete chain of evidence, link by link, forged in observation and tested in reason. Every piece now fits, no link remains weak. He turned first to the physical evidence, drawing the blue worsted thread from its envelope and holding it to the light that slanted through the stained glass. Link 1. This single fibre of blue wool caught on the edge of the wound. The cannon wore only black. It came from the sleeve of Mr. Thorpe's overcoat, torn in the struggle, as confirmed by the matching tear we found in his wardrobe. The coat itself bears no other damage. The tear is fresh, recent to the night of the murder. Next, the boot print photograph. Link 2. The heel impression in the dust beside the altar. 3 crooked hobnails unmistakable. The Petit France bootmaker identified it as Mr. Thorpe's right boot, repaired only 10 days earlier. He wore those boots that night. The print is undisturbed by later feet. Holmes produced the small silver button. Link 3. This button, fallen beneath the altar cloth during the dragging of the strongbox. Engraved MT inside, from the cuff of Mr. Thorpe's cassock, torn loose when he forced the flagstone and moved the iron chest containing his secret ledger. He laid the reconstructed telegram impression on the altar cloth. Link 4. Timeline. The impression left on the blotter beneath the burned original summons. Meet me in the Lady Chapel at 10. Urgent matter of the accounts. TL. In the canon's own hand. Mr. Thorpe received it, came, killed, and attempted to destroy the note. He overlooked the carbon trace. Holmes unfolded the ledger fragment. Link 5. Motive. These figures show systematic embezzlement from the fabric fund. Small sums at first, growing larger. Initials TL crossed out, replaced by withdrawals. The canon discovered it, hid this private record beneath the cloister stone, and summoned Thorpe for confrontation. The theft turned to murder when exposure became certain. Finally, Holmes drew forth the blood-stained handkerchief, unfolding it with care. Link 6, the final binding one. This linen square, monogrammed MT, found sewn into the lining of Mr. Thorpe's satchel. Dried blood, Canon Langley's, as the yard surgeon confirmed by type. Mr. Thorpe cut his own hand, forcing the treasury lock. In a panic, he used this to wipe both the wound and the hilt. He missed the blood that soaked through. Thorpe lifted his head at last, face ashen, voice barely audible. I confess it all. I struck him. I staged the suicide. I thought the church would be spared scandal. I was wrong. Lady Eleanor gave a soft gasp, hand to her veil. Grimshaw crossed himself. Lestrade stepped forward, nodding once to Holmes. Holmes continued, unruffled. Every link accounted for. Physical evidence connects to timeline. Timeline to witness statements. The Verger's discovery. Lady Eleanor's confirmed absence at the soirée. Miss Voss's alibi in Brighton. Motive binds them. Gratitude soured by debt. Debt into theft. Theft into murder. No other hand could have forged this chain. He turned slowly, regarding each person in turn. Mr. Thorpe, your crime is laid bare. Not by suspicion, but by the silent testimony of stone, fabric, blood, and paper. The chain is complete. It binds you inescapably. Lestrade gestured. The constables led Thorpe away down the nave. His footsteps echoed, growing fainter until the great door closed behind him with a heavy thud. Lady Eleanor approached Holmes, voice trembling but steady. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, for truth. For clearing the innocent shadows my husband spoke of in his last days. Holmes inclined his head. Truth requires only observation, madam. The rest follows. We left the Abbey together, stepping into pale sunlight that warmed the cold flags. Big Ben struck the quarter hour, its bronze note rolling across the precinct like a final knell. Back at Baker Street that evening, the fire burned bright. Holmes sat in his armchair, pipe drawing steadily, the strong tobacco scent mingling with the faint leather smell of my medical bag nearby. Every link accounted for, Watson, he said softly, the chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. The morning following the confrontation in the Lady Chapel dawned with unusual clarity over London. A pale winter sun cut through the last wisps of river mist, gilding the spires of Westminster Abbey and turning the wet cobblestones of Dean's Yard into mirrors. At 2:21, B. Baker Street, the fire had been banked high overnight. Its steady crackle mingled with the soft hiss of the gasogene as I prepared a pot of strong coffee. The bitter aroma filled the room, cutting through the lingering scent of Holmes's tobacco from the night before. A sharp rap at the door announced Inspector Lestrade. He entered briskly, bowler hat in hand, cheeks flushed from the cold walk. "It's done, Holmes," he said without preamble. The warrant was signed at first light. We take Thorpe at 9 o'clock sharp from the cells at Cannon Row. The Commissioner wants it quiet. No press scrum, no sensation. But he insists you be present. Says the case is yours by right. Holmes rose from his armchair. Ulster already buttoned. Very well. Let us see justice bound in iron, as well as logic. We travelled by hansom through streets still quiet save for the clatter of early milk carts and the distant toll of church bells. The fog had lifted completely. The air carried only the clean bite of frost and the faint ever-present smell of coal smoke rising from 1,000 chimneys. At Cannon Row Police Station, the cells smelled of carbolic soap, damp stone, and the sour tang of unwashed wool. Thorpe waited in the corridor, wrists already manacled, flanked by 2 constables. He looked smaller in daylight, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow, the grey prison jacket hanging loosely on his frame. When he saw Holmes, he straightened slightly, as though some remnant of clerical dignity remained. "You came to watch me fall, then?" Thorpe's voice was hoarse, almost mocking. Holmes regarded him without an expression. "I came to see the chain close, Mr. Thorpe." "The links were forged by your own hands. Now, they bind you." Lestrade cleared his throat. "Martin Thorpe, you are charged with the willful murder of Canon Theodore Langley on the night of the 14th of November, 1889, within the precincts of Westminster Abbey. You will be conveyed to Bow Street for committal proceedings. Have you anything to say?" Thorpe's gaze dropped to the stone floor. For a long moment he was silent. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I thought, if it looked like despair, the church would mourn him quietly. No scandal, no ruin for his memory, or mine. I was wrong. The truth has no mercy." He lifted his eyes to Holmes one last time. "You saw everything, every small thing. How does a man live, knowing he missed nothing?" Holmes answered softly, "By observing more and assuming less." The constables led him out to the waiting Black Maria. The iron door clanged shut, the horses stamped, and the van rattled away toward Bow Street, wheels grinding over cobbles. We followed in a second cab. At the magistrate's court the proceedings were brief and formal. The clerk read the charge. Lestrade gave a terse summary of the evidence. The magistrate, stern, bespectacled, nodded once and committed Thorpe for trial at the Old Bailey. No bail was asked, none granted. The court smelled of polished wood, old paper, and the faint metallic bite of ink. Outside, a small knot of reporters waited, but Lestrade's men kept them at bay. One persistent fellow thrust a notebook forward. "Mr. Holmes, a word for the press. How did you know it wasn't suicide?" Holmes paused only long enough to say, "By looking at what was there, sir, rather than what was supposed to be there." We returned to Baker Street by early afternoon. The sun had strengthened. Its light slanted across the rug, warming the room. Holmes removed his coat and stood before the fire, hands clasped behind his back. "Loose ends, Watson," he said. "They must be tied." He enumerated them methodically. First, the rumours of the canon's melancholy. Thorpe himself spread them. Casual remarks to the verger, to the beadle Wilkins, preparing the ground for a suicide verdict. Wilkins, eager for attention and ale money, embellished them into ghostly tales, both weak links, already broken. Second, the treasury key found in the cannon's pocket. Thorpe replaced it after forcing the case. Another clumsy attempt at misdirection. The scratches on the glass told the truth. Third, Lady Eleanor's distress. She had suspected financial irregularities, but feared to accuse without proof. The ledger fragment clears her conscience and restores the fabric fund. The Dean has already begun an audit. Restitution will be made from Thorpe's modest savings and the sale of his effects. Fourth, Scotland Yard's role. Lestrade, for once, listened when the evidence spoke louder than appearances. He has recommended a commendation for you in his report, quietly, of course. I smiled despite myself. And you? Holmes waved a hand. I require no commendations. The work is its own reward. He drew upon his pipe, the strong tobacco scent rising in slow curls. The fire crackled. Outside, a hansom passed, wheels hissing on the now dry street. The criminal is bound, Watson. Handcuffs and cell doors do the final work, but the chain of evidence forged the fetters long before. Justice, slow, silent, inexorable, has been served. He turned to the window, gazing down at Baker Street where life moved on. Pedestrians, cabs, the occasional cry of a newsboy. The criminal bound. Justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. The days following Thorpe's committal passed in a hush that seemed almost unnatural after the storm of revelation. London moved on with its accustomed rhythm. Hansoms clattering over cobbles, newsboys crying the latest headlines, gas lamps flaring at dusk. But at Westminster Abbey, a subtle healing had begun. The winter sun, pale but persistent, slanted through the great windows, warming the stones that had so recently borne witness to murder. I set down these final notes in my journal on the morning of the inquest, held in the coroner's court at Westminster Guildhall. The room smelled of old varnish, ink, and the faint mustiness of legal ledgers stacked on shelves. A small crowd had gathered, mostly clergy, a few reporters, Lady Eleanor Langley seated in the front row, with her veil lifted, face composed, though still shadowed by grief. The coroner, a dry, precise man with steel-rimmed spectacles, opened proceedings promptly at 10. Evidence was presented methodically. Lestrade gave his testimony of the arrest and confession. The surgeon confirmed the nature of the wound and the impossibility of self-infliction. Grimshaw recounted the discovery of the body. Holmes was not called. He rarely was at inquests, but his name hung over every word spoken. When the ledger fragment and the blood-stained handkerchief were produced, a low murmur ran through the room. The coroner cleared his throat. Having heard the evidence, I am satisfied that Canon Theodore Langley met his death by the hand of Martin Thorpe, with malice aforethought. The verdict is wilful murder. The prisoner will stand trial at the Central Criminal Court. The gavel fell once, sharp and final. Lady Eleanor bowed her head briefly, then rose and left without speaking to anyone. Outside in the corridor, she paused when she saw us waiting near the door. "Dr. Watson, Mr. Holmes," her voice was steady. "The Dean has asked me to convey his thanks. The Fabric Fund, those discrepancies Thorpe created, will be made good. A special collection has already begun among the congregation. The Abbey's work continues without stain." Holmes inclined his head. "The innocent should never bear the weight of another's crime, Lady Eleanor. Your husband's memory is cleared. That is the true restoration." She managed a small, genuine smile, the first I had seen from her. He would have wished it so. He always said the church endures not through perfection, but through truth. We parted in the pale sunlight of the courtyard. Big Ben struck the quarter hour. Its bronze note rolled across the precinct, steady and reassuring. Later that afternoon, Holmes and I called at the Dean's residence in Little Dean's Yard. The Dean, an elderly man with white hair and a gentle manner, received us in a book-lined study smelling of leather bindings and beeswax polish. A fresh fire burned in the grate. The warmth was welcome against the chill that still lingered in the stone walls. "Mr. Holmes," the Dean said, rising to shake hands, "your work has spared us a greater scandal than the loss of one man. The ledger has been examined. The sums Thorpe diverted were not irreplaceable. We shall restore them quietly. The chapter has voted to name the new east window in Canon Langley's memory, the Window of Truth and Mercy. A fitting tribute." Holmes accepted the thanks with his usual reserve. "The tribute belongs to the evidence itself, Dean. It spoke when men would not." We left soon after, walking slowly through the cloisters. The flagstones, once marked by drag scratches and boot prints, had been scrubbed clean. Fresh mortar sealed the loose stone beneath which the ledger had lain hidden. A sunlight filtered through the tracery, casting delicate patterns on the ground. That evening, back at 221B, the fire crackled high. Mrs. Hudson had brought up a tray of hot buttered toast and tea. The sweet scent of bergamot mingled with the tobacco from Holmes's pipe. Outside, the street lamps had been lit early. Their soft yellow glow pushed back the early winter dusk. Holmes sat in his armchair, legs stretched toward the blaze, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The innocent are cleared, Watson," he said quietly. "Lady Eleanor returns to her quiet life with honour intact. Miss Voss resumes her work without the shadow of suspicion. Even the beadle Wilkins, foolish though he was, escapes with only a reprimand. No charges for his embellished tales. The Abbey itself breathes again. Services resume tomorrow without whisper of scandal. London's great heart beats on, untroubled." I nodded, stirring my tea. The hot liquid warmed my hands through the china cup. "And Thorpe?" I asked. "His trial will come in the spring. The evidence is overwhelming, the sentence inevitable. But even there, justice moves without passion, cold, measured, complete." Holmes drew upon his pipe, the smoke curling upward in slow spirals. "The chain that bound the guilty has now released the innocent. Every false suspicion dissolved, every rumour silenced. Order returns, not the fragile order of appearances, but the deeper order of truth restored to its proper place." He glanced toward the window, where the gaslights of Baker Street flickered like steady stars against the gathering dark. "London's streets resume their rhythm. Fog may return, crimes may rise again, but for this moment, balance holds." He set the pipe aside and met my eyes. Order restored to London streets. Chapter 10. By the fire at Baker Street. A week had passed since the inquest, and London had settled once more into its familiar winter rhythm. The fog returned in gentle veils, softening the gaslights of Baker Street and muffling the clatter of evening hansoms. At 221B, the coal fire burned with a steady, comforting glow. Its warmth pushed back the chill that seeped through the window frames. The room smelled of toasted bread, strong Virginia tobacco, and the faint bergamot from Mrs. Hudson's tea tray. Holmes sat in his usual armchair, legs stretched toward the blaze, Stradivarius resting across his knees. He drew the bow slowly across the strings, soft contemplative notes that rose and fell like distant foghorns on the Thames. I occupied the opposite chair, journal open on my lap, pen idle for the moment. The newspapers of the day lay folded on the side table. The headlines had moved on to parliamentary squabbles and a minor railway accident in Kent. The Abbey murder had faded from public notice, as such cases often do when justice is served quietly and without spectacle. Holmes set the violin aside and reached for his pipe, tamping fresh shack from the Persian slipper. "A satisfactory conclusion, Watson," he said, striking a match. The sulphur flared briefly. Tobacco smoke curled upward in slow spirals. Yet conclusions are merely pauses. The chain we forged remains instructive. I nodded, turning back to my notes. "The paper scarcely mentioned your name," I remarked. "Only a brief paragraph in the Times. Westminster tragedy, resolved by police deduction. Lestrade takes the credit as usual." Holmes smiled faintly. "Let him. Publicity is a distraction. The work endures. But for us, for the private record, the method itself deserves reflection." He leaned back, steepled his fingers beneath his chin, eyes half closed in that familiar attitude of deep thought. "The chain method, Watson, is nothing more than disciplined observation linked by inexorable logic. Each clue, a thread, a boot print, a button, a blood stain, is but a single link, meaningless alone. Yet when we observe precisely, forge connections through reason, and test every assumption, the links bind into an unbreakable whole. The criminal may wipe a hilt, burn a note, stage a scene, but he cannot erase the memory of stone, the tenacity of fabric, the chemistry of blood. Nature leaves traces. Deception cannot erase them all." He paused, drawing deeply on his pipe. "Compare this affair to the Speckled Band, that grim business at Stoke Moran some years ago. There, too, a single overlooked detail, the ventilator grill in the wall, forged the first link. A bell rope that moved no bell, a saucer of milk that fed no cat, the whistle in the night. Each observation seemed trivial. Together they revealed a trained snake, a murderous stepfather, and a fortune secured by terror. I saw 3 links where others saw coincidence. The chain tightened, the villain perished by his own device. So here, the wiped hilt seemed to support suicide, until the impossible angle of the wound connected it to murder. The blue thread appeared meaningless, until it matched Thorpe's torn sleeve. Link by link, the invisible became visible, the accidental became inevitable. Holmes rose and paced slowly before the fire, shadows dancing across the walls. Why does observation defeat deception? Because the deceiver must act in the real world, and the real world remembers. A footprint in dust, a fibre caught on steel, a button fallen in haste. These are not inventions. They are facts, stubborn and silent, waiting only for the trained eye to notice them. The science of deduction is not magic. It is relentless patience. Eliminate the impossible, and whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Every criminal forgets something. The master detective remembers to look for what was forgotten. He stopped, turning to me with that peculiar light in his eyes. In this case, the chain began with 3 small observations in the Lady Chapel. The clean hilt beside bloodied gloves. The unnatural angle of the dagger. The alien thread on the wound. From those humble links grew the rest, bootprint button, ledger, handkerchief, until the entire structure stood complete. Thorpe's history of obligation turned poison-explained motive, but the physical traces convicted him. Past gratitude, present theft, final murder, all bound by evidence that could not lie. He resumed his seat, setting the pipe aside. To you, dear reader, who have followed these events through my journal, I offer this final wisdom. Train your eye to see the small things. The world is loud with distraction, bright with illusion, but truth hides in the overlooked detail. The scuff on a boot, the thread on a blade, the impression on a blotter. Forge your own chains of observation. Question appearances. Connect what seems unconnected. When you do, the deceptions of others will unravel before you, link by link. Holmes leaned forward slightly, voice lowering as though speaking to an intimate circle. Crime will come again, as surely as fog returns to the Thames. But so long as there are eyes that see and minds that reason, the game need never end in darkness. He picked up the violin once more, drawing a single lingering note that hung in the warm air. Until the next chain forges, dear listener, the game continues. The fire crackled softly. Outside, a hansom passed, its wheels fading into the night. Holmes closed his eyes, bow moving gently across the strings, and the room filled with quiet music, a fitting close to our winter's work.